I will pass the mic to Sophie to introduce herself and also go with the flow. Thank you.
Great, thank you. My name is Sophie Wheel and I'm a consultant engineer at Xodus. And today I'm going to talk about digitalisation of pipeline integrity management, our journey through that, with particularly a focus on subsea and pipelines, and why we think it's really important for the industry as well. So today I'm just going to talk about a little bit about my career and how I've ended up working in integrity management. I'm going to give a little bit of a background on integrity management for anybody who's a little bit less familiar with the processes. And then the majority of the talk will be about the digitalisation side of things. I've got a couple of examples to go through, and then we'll just talk a little bit about looking forward where Xodus is going in the future with digitalisation. So a little bit about myself. I started in Atkins in their subsea team, working in integrity management, and then moved over to Xodus in summer of 2018. As I said, my focus has been integrity management. I've been involved in a few long-term integrity management contracts, and the assessments that come with that. Majority of my experience to date has been in the UK North Sea, but I've also done a variety of risk assessments and integrity assessments for global clients as well. And I've kind of done a little bit of everything as well over the last few years: pipeline design, FEA, and also some digital tool development, starting a little bit earlier on and then really getting involved as part of Xodus. I've got some offshore experience, going on survey vessels and DSV, and really enjoyed that. And obviously integrity management, the management part is quite a big part of it. So I've really had a chance to develop my project management skills as well. And I just thought I'd mention STEM. That's something that I've been involved in throughout my career. I think it's really important. It's a way of getting access to the younger generation, encouraging them into things like engineering. I lead our STEM ambassadors in Xodus at the moment. So my integrity management experience and how that's developed so far, as I said, I've been involved with these kind of long-term integrity management projects throughout my career. So these are sort of lasting 3 or 4 years each. So obviously, quite a long time. So I started as part of Atkins. I was delivering integrity management contract to Premier Oil. And this was really the integrity management fundamentals, which we'll talk about in a moment. Learning what data was gathered, how to assess the data, and the kind of issues that may come up in pipeline integrity management, and also starting to build that client interaction as well. I then moved on to managing the integrity of a pipeline called the BBL pipeline, and this is a gas interconnector between the Netherlands and the UK. So there was a Dutch and UK split. So a slight difference in integrity approach. The Dutch side tends to be a little bit more prescriptive with permitting, whereas UK is a little bit different, which we'll talk about in a second. So really my role here was to develop the kind of standard integrity management procedures that we would see in the UK. And with that, introducing a risk-based inspection approach. They were inspecting the pipeline every year, which was potentially not necessary. So we looked at that from a risk-based approach, and I was able to demonstrate that they could push it out to at least 2 years. Obviously, there's money to be saved there and efficiencies to be created. And this is a project that I first got offshore experience on as well. I got to go out on the survey vessels and understand how the data was actually captured and see the issues that might arise through that. So that was really interesting. And a big part of this contract was also liaison with the authorities, so both the Dutch and the UK side. And it was a really good experience for me because I had to defend the integrity management procedures that we were putting into place, and also demonstrate the integrity of the pipeline as well directly to the authorities. And this was really great because I got to present the risk-based inspection approach that we'd taken for the pipeline, which obviously included the Dutch side, and the Dutch authorities accepted that approach, which was new for them. So that was a great success. And then I was brought into Xodus to lead the CNR integrity contract for all of their pipelines. So that was a step up for me. I got to come in and lead a team of sort of 4, 5, 6 engineers, which has been really great. And also having to really kind of define the strategy and the approach that we were taking. And I really consider it kind of end-to-end integrity management, right from the tie-in to the well, right up to the top sides, and everything in between, and late life assets. So lots of integrity assessments that we needed. So doing things like corrosion assessments, fatigues, and leading all these kind of studies as well as part of my role as the team lead. And a big part of this contract is also the digitalisation side. So the tools that Xodus have, developing that part of my role was developing that and keeping that up to date and working in the best way possible for CNR. And then a little bit about Xodus. So there's a nice slide here which shows all the different areas of the energy industry that we are involved in. Obviously, you can see there's quite a wide variety, and we're going to talk a little bit about things that cover both like subsea and pipelines, integrity management, obviously, and a little bit of late life and decommissioning, and also data and digital solutions. So you can see there's a really integrated approach that we take at Xodus, where you can't work by yourself. You have to talk to all of these other discipline areas and work together. As I said, we're a global energy consultancy, so we do have offices all over the world, including one in Cairo as well. So, as I said, I thought I'd give us a little bit about integrity management for anybody who's a little bit less familiar with the process. There is a little bit of a UK focus, as that's the majority of my experience, but I do think that a lot of this applies to everyone. So integrity management approach is generally based on the plan, do, check, act cycle, which I'm sure most people are familiar with. It's a process that is used across all of the industries and can be used at both a strategic level and a kind of individual task level. And it's really there to kind of ensure that learnings from previous iterations are taken forward into future cycles. So if we start at the plan stage, for our integrity management cycle, what we do is write all of our integrity management documentation. So create all of that guidance of how our assets are going to be managed, lay all that out. So including responsibilities, maybe like the audit process. And then from that, we also need to develop a inspection and maintenance plan. So in the UK, that is risk-based, so risk-based inspection plan. So you would set that out as part of the planning phase, and that would tell us when we're going to do activities and how we're going to do that. We'd also define all our procedures. So how are we going to do things, and how do we identify any issues that we might have on these assets as well. And then we move on to the do phase. And this is where we collect our data. So that could be going offshore and doing inspections, or it could be doing maintenance and repair. But we also would include any monitoring data here. So anywhere where we're capturing continuous data, maybe through a digital platform or anything like that. So there's a couple of different things there. And once we have the data, we would move on to the check phase. And that is really where we look at all this information and review the kind of outcomes of the work we've done. So what does that tell us about the integrity of the assets? Does it give us sufficient information to make an assessment? And is there any anomalies that we need to raise? And that would really come from the plan stage. We should have defined what an anomaly looks like, what are the parameters to call something an anomaly, and we would raise them based on that in the check phase. And we would also then raise some actions. Potentially we might need to do some remediation or anything like that as identified by the anomalies. And then we'd move on to the act phase, and this is where we wouldn't be creating new information here. We would just be looking at all the information that we had created and looking at maybe doing some annual assessment. So what is the overall integrity of our pipeline? Can we move forward with this pipeline or asset? And also capturing some lessons learned. So what have we learned from the previous process? Anything that went wrong or anything that went particularly right, we want to make sure we do that again. We'd also do some auditing as part of this process. Again, we would have to set that out in our PIMS procedures at the start. What audit requirements do we need to do, and how do we do that to make sure that we're aligned with any kind of regulations or legislation. And then we'd also identify any improvements. So anything that maybe hasn't worked from the lessons learned, how do we improve that, and how do we implement that into our integrity management cycle going forward? And then we would come back around to the plan phase, and we would make sure that our documentation and our plan really takes into account the findings from the kind of check and act part, so that our do phase again now matches up with an improved plan. So for instance, you might get a wall thickness reading that shows that the corrosion rate is actually more significant than you were expecting. And so you'd have to redo your risk assessment. Your risk assessment is maybe now showing a higher risk of, say, internal corrosion. And so the inspection frequency of, say, your ILI might be reduced, and you might have to go from sort of 10 years to 5 years. So it's a really important part of the plan of the cycle. And I think it's important to highlight that bit, because it's something that can be easily forgotten about. The continuous improvement is the reason why this is a cycle, so that you can implement those improvements each time. It's very easy to just do the same activities each year, each week, and so on. But if you don't learn from what you've done previously, then you are never going to kind of improve the integrity of your assets. And then looking a little bit at legislation, so again, with a UK focus, but in the UK, we are regulated by the pipeline safety regulations, and these were developed under the Health and Safety Act in the UK, which has a goal setting philosophy. So the idea behind this is that there's no kind of prescriptive requirements of exactly what we have to do with our assets, pipelines. There's no specific inspection frequency for anything. However, we have to demonstrate the integrity of our pipelines in a way that is considered hopefully best practice. And the way that we do that, generally speaking, is risk assessments. So we take a risk-based approach. And to go along with that is the concept of a LARP, so as low as reasonably practicable, the idea being trying to reduce your risks as low as possible. However, the last bit, practicable, means that the mitigations implemented to reduce your risk should be proportionate. So we're not looking to do something that is going to cost us millions and millions of pounds to only save a couple of barrels of oil in production, say. So for example, maybe a cable run over a walkway, a proportionate mitigation would be maybe to put a mat over it, put a trip hazard sign, something along those lines. A disproportionate mitigation would say that you would have to reroute the cable, or you'd have to move the plant. That wouldn't be a LARP, that would be too harsh. So it's all about setting out the risks and setting out these proportionate mitigations. And that's the kind of approach that we take in the UK. And although this is the UK, I think because we take a goal setting philosophy and it is risk-based, it can generally be implemented anywhere in the world, as long as you then also take into account any local legislation and regulations that might apply. I've listed a few things there that we do have to take into account. So we do have to define safe operating limits, we do have to define emergency response, and we also create a document called the Major Accident Prevention Document, which is a specific risk assessment looking at the loss of containment of hydrocarbons, basically, that then could cause harm to people. So that has to be in place before you can operate a pipeline in the UK. And yeah, just a little bit on risk assessments. So we first identify the hazards or the threats that could affect our pipeline or our asset, and then what incident those could cause and the consequences of that incident. And then a really important part is identifying those mitigations, so those preventative actions. And really what we want to do is try and limit the chance of the incident happening in the first place. Obviously, no mitigation is without a flaw or a hole, as shown by this common Swiss cheese model. And so we really want to stack those mitigations to try and reduce the chance of a hazard leading to an incident, and an incident leading to certain consequences. I think this is a good image that shows the kind of imbalance that we generally want with mitigations. We really want to focus on those preventative actions before the incident occurring, because that's how you stop consequences happening, obviously. Whereas there's only so much you can do to mitigate something once it's already happened. There's only so much you can do to mitigate a jet fire, for instance. You can reduce the consequence to a point, but there'll always be a fairly high consequence. So although we can put mitigations in after the incident, we really want to look at those mitigations between the hazard and the incident to start with. Okay, so now I thought I'd just take us through our sort of digitalisation journey and our thoughts behind that and why it's become so important. So we got involved in integrity management during the downturn. Obviously, some of our design work and things were slowing down, and we really were looking for some different ways of getting into the industry. And our clients were also coming to us saying that they weren't really happy with how their integrity management was being done. Obviously, budgets were being squeezed and things like that. So they asked us to take a look and see what we could do and what solutions we could come up with. So when we took a look at what was being done, what we generally found is that the technical sides of things were fine. You know, the engineering work that was being done was being performed by good qualified people, but the problem was with the data and the management of the information. So there was lots of siloed systems, maybe some digital platforms where they weren't speaking to each other, and also a lot of offline data as well. So a lot of spreadsheets, which obviously, as we all know, are difficult to keep up to date, and they don't speak to each other and might have conflicting or repeated data in them. This was leading to this like over-reliance on particular people, a lot of information stored in people's heads or on people's computers. And obviously there's a risk to the business if they were to leave. And also maybe the budgets weren't being spent in quite the right place. If you don't have all the information, or you can't get it all together, or you can't compare it in the right way, how do you know that you are targeting the highest risks or the most important things? And also so much time was just spent on managing data that not all of the work that needed to be done was being completed. And you know, if we've seen from the integrity management cycle there, it is a cycle that's happening at least every year, maybe every 6 months, every month. There's huge amounts of data coming in for each pipeline. And so managing that data anyway is difficult, but as the assets are aging, as they're going beyond their design life, and more work needs to be done, more inspection, more repair, more assessments, that increases the integrity workload, and it just becomes even more, it just becomes unsustainable for individuals to complete. Oh, apologies. And what we were seeing as well, that people didn't really want to move to a different way of doing things. Despite all of these problems, there was this thought that maybe, you know, a new system would cost millions of pounds, and they just didn't even want to start thinking about it because it just was not really a solution they thought was possible. We also found pushback because there was maybe quite a lot of data gaps, particularly the older assets. And you know, the questions would come like, why would we put this information into a digital system when we don't have all the information? It's not going to give us any benefit, and also it may highlight data gaps that they weren't aware of and they didn't want to know about. And you know, a big thing that comes up is interfacing with the historical systems. We've talked about workload already, and we don't want to make more work for people by putting in a new system. So how can we make sure that we're not just giving them a new system to learn that's also siloed, for instance? So the solution that we came up with was effectively a digital platform. Obviously talked about digitalisation, and what we thought was important, what we found was important, is to develop these solutions together with our clients, make sure that we were giving them something that actually was going to work for them and is what they were wanting, rather than maybe some of these bigger systems that already exist, but are kind of one size fits all, which isn't really the case. And so we came up with building something in a modular way, so lots of different modules that do different things, different parts of the integrity cycle. And that means it's quite low cost because you can just have the modules you need, or you can just start with a few modules rather than having to buy a fully fledged system and you might only be using half of it. But if we were going to build something in a modular way, we needed to make sure that we had everything linked together. So lots of digital linking, the system you should only upload something once to the system, and then if you need that information elsewhere within the system, you just create a link to it. And that just reduces the chance of repeated information, mismatched information, and errors. And also means that people can go find that data anywhere in the system just by going through the various links. We needed to be collating everything in one place. So rather than capturing, say, anomalies for the top sides in one system and anomalies for the subsea part of the pipeline in a different place, they all had to be collated in one place so that the overall risk profile of a pipeline could be seen in one go. And we also had to allow for this kind of continuous improvement as part of the integrated management cycle. So partly by building it in a modular way, you can add new modules at any point if there's something you're missing, or you can kind of update modules without kind of impacting the function of the other ones. And the integration with external systems is obviously an important one, as we talked about in the previous slide. So we have developed links with Pi and Maximo, which are obviously two really common systems used by clients, by operators. And we're also looking at Coabis and ChemWatcher, which are other systems that our clients use as well. So that was really important to us, and it's a not always ongoing thing that we're working on. And our solution specifically is called XAMIN. So that is Xodus Asset Management and Integrity Network. And we've got now this network of 5 key operators who work with XAMIN, and it's a good mix of operators where we also deliver the integrated management services, and some operators who just take XAMIN as a product, which we're also happy to do. And it's worth mentioning that these operators aren't massive players, they're not huge operators, they're generally small independent operators who have late life assets, so don't have huge budgets to implement new systems. And so hopefully that's a good reflection of the fact that XAMIN didn't cost millions of pounds to build, and it didn't take months and months, and it is also bespoke to a point for what they need. It's worth mentioning that Harbour Energy is bigger now, but it was originally built for just the Premier system that they acquired. So I thought what I'd do is I'd take you back to the plan, do, check, act cycle that we looked at earlier, and just show you some examples of some of the modules and the reasons that we have these in the system. Now, I could probably do a whole webinar just on taking you around the XAMIN site, so I'm obviously not going to do that to you. So these are just examples of particular parts of the system, but if anybody ever wants to know more about it, then obviously I'm more than happy to talk about it. Also just worth noting that in some places it might look a little bit odd, and it's only because I've just taken away client names and asset names and numbers and things like that. So if we start in the plan phase, we have the risk-based inspection plan. It is obviously kind of the cornerstone of the system. It really drives a lot of the information through the system. Pretty much all of the information is eventually linked back to this risk-based inspection plan. So what we used to do is we used to do these risk-based inspection plans offline in separate documents, and then the kind of results would be summarized. You see them here. So risk for each segment, the inspection required for those segments, and then we summarize the last inspections. So doing that is already quite digital, putting into XAMIN, because you can link the inspections that have been completed. However, doing the actual risk assessments offline obviously is a little bit clunky and not easily updated. So what we have done behind this screen is there is a risk assessment builder. So for each segment, you can list all of the different threats that you would find for that segment, do your risk assessment, and sign that off, and then the system updates and that shows the overall risk. So what this means is that rather than have to do wholesale changes to the risk assessment offline, when an inspection is completed for a specific segment or a specific type of inspection is completed, you can just update the threats in the risk assessment that are affected by that inspection. So say you had an inline inspection and you, as the example I used before, you have more corrosion than you expected, you can just go into the risk assessment for each segment and just go to the threats for internal and external corrosion and change your risk assessment. And then that will filter through and change your inspection interval if needed. And then that will run all the way through the system and update the inspection interval elsewhere. Also in the plan phase, once we have that risk-based inspection, that kind of shows those like at an individual level. What we really want to do is then list all of our assets together and get this 10-year plan. So again, this was being done, or it is done on offline reports. But obviously, if you make any changes to the risk assessment, those offline reports don't automatically get updated. So this is automatically updated. It's linked to the risk assessment. And it's just a really visual way of understanding where if you need to align some inspections, so say you've got some pipelines being completed next year and some pipelines being completed the year after, why not align them into one campaign and probably create some savings and efficiencies with your vessels. In the do phase, this is just an example. We've got lots of modules within XAMIN that capture data for specific things in different ways. But the example that I'm showing you here is the corrosion module. And this is where we collect some of our automated data that we get from other systems that give us things like corrosion inhibitor, water content, H2S and CO2 content. And the operator has defined certain KPIs and certain monitoring statistics that they want to use. But what happens at these often is that these individual things are looked at individually. So is a corrosion inhibitor acceptable? Is the CO2 level acceptable? But they don't really show the whole picture of the internal corrosion threat. So by bringing them into one system and showing them all in one place, you can have a better understanding of what's happening holistically within your pipeline. So yes, okay, maybe your CO2 content is maybe a little bit higher than you want it to be, but if you've got no water in the system, then you're actually probably not got very much chance of internal corrosion. So putting it all in one place is really helpful. And also one of the other benefits that we've seen is that by digitalizing the KPI statistics, and applying the traffic lights that the operator previously defined before we were involved, what we were seeing is they were getting a lot of red KPIs. But then when you looked at the data and you did maybe the corrosion assessments, the red didn't necessarily directly relate to poor internal corrosion or lots of internal corrosion, poor internal condition. What we actually found was that maybe the KPIs weren't defined enough, they weren't nuanced enough, and they weren't telling the true picture. So we're now working with that operator to improve the KPIs and move maybe towards KPI in the corrosion rate itself by doing automated corrosion calculations from the data that we're getting, rather than just KPI in the individual data, as we can see that doesn't necessarily totally represent what's happening in the pipeline. And kind of what we'd also see as part of that corrosion module is these trended data plots. And you can kind of see the story here that maybe some of those KPIs are coming up as red, but you can maybe see from the graphs here that actually, generally speaking, the corrosion inhibitor is kind of above the requirement and the water content is generally below the requirement with a few spikes. So you kind of, by looking at the data in a couple of different ways, you get a better picture for what maybe is actually happening with your assets. And then we move on to the check phase. So again, we have quite a few different modules that do different assessments of different parts of the pipelines. So this example is riser annulus testing. So we get lots of reports. This is maybe done yearly for some risers, and the data is just stuck in reports. So by pulling it into this kind of module and again plotting the results, you get a really quick visualization of what's happening. You can see trends. You can maybe predict failures, and it just saves you having to read through each of those reports. And we can also make some assessment on the risk that we're carrying, again using the kind of risk assessment colouring and the traffic lighting there. And in a similar way, all of our anomalies are now stored, all of the anomalies for our appraisal are stored within XAMIN. So they maybe originate on different systems, but they're stored, all of them are stored within XAMIN. So you can get this overall picture of how many anomalies have you got, what risk level are you holding generally, how many have you assessed and been through and taken an action on, and how many have you still got to do. So seeing them in this kind of context gives you a really good understanding of your overall risk profile. But then what you'll find if you go through the rest of the XAMIN system is that these anomalies are then linked to specific activities as needed. So you can always drill down into the detail for like a specific pipeline, a specific segment, a specific activity, and then they're gathered together in this place. And that is the same for actions. You'll find links for actions and anomalies all over the system. And then if we move on to the ACT phase, this is an example of some parts that we do for ACT. So this is taking all of the data that we currently have and summarizing it. So in this module, this is our annual reporting module. We are not originating any data in here. This is just taking information from across those different systems that we've just seen and a variety of other ones and pulling the data together in an automated way. So I'd say about 90% of the information that is in this assessment module exists elsewhere in XAMIN, and it's just summarized based on a particular asset. So in this case, a specific pipeline. What we were doing previously was even once we had XAMIN, we were using XAMIN to get all our inspection data, do our monitoring data, all the things that we just saw, but then we were summarizing that in, again, in offline reports, which was what our clients were asking for. So we kind of prioritize making a new module for that and putting those reports onto an online system because the data already exists in XAMIN. So why were we taking it off and rewriting it? Because that's just going to, recipe for mistakes and duplication and all those kind of things that we were trying to get rid of. And this has been a really big success. As soon as we implemented this, for one operator, all our other clients wanted it as well. And now this is how we do all of our annual reporting. And as I said, as about 90% of the information exists already and it is just summarized, all the engineers have to do is go through and make the engineering assessments on the integrity of the different components and the overall pipeline. So they're spending their time on engineering rather than replicating data. So the successes and the lessons learned we've had from this, we found that it's generally quite a cost-effective solution for our clients. The first client that we built this for had spent quite a lot of money looking at all the systems out there and doing sort of desk studies of what they could implement, but never actually implemented everything. And we came in, implemented a solution for much less than is spent doing the research. We also find that it's a really quick way of our technical authorities accessing the information that they need to demonstrate the integrity of their assets. Before they'd have to sift through lots of documents and spreadsheets, and now the module that I just showed you there, the kind of summary module, they literally can just point to that and say, this is the risk of this particular asset. And if you want to know more information, you can just click into the links and find out more. And in a similar vein, we've had really good HSE feedback for the similar idea that the integrity is really easy to demonstrate, the activities and the reasoning behind the risk assessments that we're making is easy to find and access. And a kind of practical example of how this has been useful. So for a client, we were looking at freeze spans, and obviously freeze spans can cause fatigue on the pipeline. And if they are locked in place, you're obviously constantly consuming the fatigue life of that particular part of the pipeline. But actually by plotting the seabed and the pipeline in relation to the seabed, we could see how these freeze spans were shifting along the pipeline. And actually that meant that the fatigue damage being accrued in specific locations wasn't as bad as maybe was once thought, which obviously gives us more life in the pipeline and helps with things like life extension. And we find that the return of investment for our clients is about 100 times typically of what they're putting in. And this kind of comes from two ways. So the plot that I've showed here is the average man-hour cost to our clients that we were charging for integrity management while we were developing XAMIN for them. So we started off at quite a high average cost, because we were getting a lot of senior people working on the project because the data wasn't particularly readily accessible. So they were having to spend time understanding the pipelines, understanding what information they needed to know. And they were the experts, so they could do that better than the junior engineers could. But as we implemented XAMIN, what we found is that our average man-hour cost was reducing over time, because we could get more junior people onto the project. The information was readily available for them. They didn't have to go searching. They didn't have to work out which bit was important and which bit maybe wasn't. And then the senior members of the team were there for technical leadership rather than doing the work themselves. So that's that's part of it. That's maybe a smaller part, but also just implementing these systems gives us much better access to our data, which has meant that for one of our clients, we identified they were doing a lot of inspections that weren't needed, particularly vessel-based inspections. So by reducing the frequency of those vessel inspections, you're talking hundreds and thousands of pounds being saved in vessel days. So yeah, and also anytime you are maybe preventing production loss by predicting things going wrong or identifying anomalies early so that they can be rectified before production loss is happening, that's also saving huge amounts of money. So that's where we're seeing the return on investment for our clients. The lessons that we've learned are that kind of company champions are really important, along with kind of senior management support, getting those people in, the operators who kind of really believe in digitalization and kind of understand what you're trying to achieve is really important to kind of push it forward. And then once you can get a bit of traction, we often get people on board quite easily. But it's also given us access to different parts of the company that we never had planned to kind of talk to, but because they've seen how we can digitalize things and make things more efficient, they're willing to back us to their colleagues as well, which is obviously great for us. So it's a really good access point to our clients. The next one is probably an obvious one, but it's a huge win in that just linking things together in a system and tracking it in one system saves a huge amount of time. And we, rather than engineers just data managing and digging out reports and just spending all that time doing that stuff, by putting it in one place and linking them together, they can do the engineering stuff, the stuff they signed up to, the stuff that's interesting. So not only does it save time, but it keeps people engaged as well, which is a big thing is really important. We also found that one solution doesn't fit all. So I kind of referenced that a little bit earlier, that we have a standard set of modules that kind of fit around the integrity management cycle, but there are lots of other ones that we have that some clients have and some clients don't, depending on specifically what they're trying to manage or what they're trying to achieve. And we found that that's really important, and that's the best way to kind of get the clients on board, is that you can have for standard modules that we are well developed and have been developed with a community of operators, but then you can also build your own for the specific things that you need, and that's been really popular. And similarly, using a modular build means that you don't have to do it all at once. You can just start with that basic building block and then build up. Just start getting information into the system. You'll start finding those data gaps, and then you can, but you don't have to necessarily fill those data gaps straight away. Just getting information into the system is really important. And then as you do more work, as you do more assessments, you can dig deeper into that data and start populating it. But if you don't start, then it's obviously not going to get any better. And also, one of the things we found, particularly in the UK, because of the decommissioning requirements, that this is really important to kind of start building for decommissioning, because you often have to get pretty much all of this information ready for decommission anyway to demonstrate your decommissioning approach. And obviously there's very little money in decommissioning. Chances are you're not producing anything, so the budget maybe isn't there to start something new, implement a new system, buy a new digital platform. So even when some of our clients have maybe thought, well, we're quite late in life, really should we kind of implement this stuff now, there is a driver for things like decommissioning. And also with the way the industry is going towards kind of emissions reduction and renewable sources, there's going to be a big push for demonstrating reuse cases. Can your pipelines be reused for something else? And you need to have the integrity data available to be able to do that. So do you really want to be paying for that process? Maybe when there isn't any money coming into the company. And so just a couple of sort of quick examples of some digitalization that we've had particular success with recently. So one of them is on a digital platform on XAMIN, and the other one isn't actually, but it is still digitalization of our data. So the first one is a digital data exchange. So two of our operators already had XAMIN systems with us. They had spent time building their data in the system and managing their assets through our platform. But they had some pipelines that they both had an interest in. So one operator had pipelines that came onto the platform of another operator. And what they were doing is they were then taking this information off XAMIN on terms of the condition of them, the inspections that had been completed, the actions that needed to be done. And then they were taking that off, writing it in a offline report, and then having quite detailed meetings going through all of the data individually. And it's quite laborious and just not a good use of anybody's time. So we pushed them to do this data exchange through a digital platform. So we created a module for them as a digital data exchange. It sits on both of their XAMIN systems, so they can both access it, but they only have access to that, so they can't see data from the other operator beyond just this exchange. And also it basically requires no additional effort from the engineers because they're already populating their own system with the integrity data for their own use. This system just collates that together in one module that they can both see. So the only real work that the engineers have to do to get this ready is just update the actions ready for the meeting. And now the meetings are very much more focused on what are the key actions, how are we going to get them implemented, how do we improve the integrity of our systems. So that's been a really big success, and we actually have an article out there talking a little bit more about it if anybody's interested. And the one on the right is a GIS map of one of our clients' infrastructure. Now, the UK Oil and Gas Authority has recently kind of changed their philosophy a little bit for gathering infrastructure data to be GIS based. So this is something they've always done, gathered the infrastructure data for safety, but also just understanding kind of how the UK North Sea is made up. And it seems like a fairly obvious approach, and I do think it's a great approach, but our clients don't hold their infrastructure data in GIS. So it's a big undertaking to ask the industry to move towards GIS. So we've been helping our clients do that recently. And I think it's a really positive move to move all of our data to GIS. So we've got a GIS team within Xodus, so they've been helping us out with that. And this is an ongoing process. So this is a fairly simple model, but we've already seen the benefits of it from our client. So they had a fishing claim. So a fishing vessel had to cut their nets because they'd got stuck on a pipeline. And they made a claim to this client to say, the kind of for the liability of those nets. And our client was immediately able to just plot this onto the GIS map that we were creating for them and really quickly identify that actually was nowhere near their pipeline. So they were immediately able to kind of dispute the claim, obviously saving money, saving time, but also potential money in terms of a successful claim. And this is something that we'll continue to do going forward. We're going to be developing this model even further. So it's the full GIS model of all their assets, and they can use it to kind of map their own stuff, not just the stuff that the Oil and Gas Authority is requesting from them. So looking forward, finally, just where are we going next in digitalization? So I've spoken mostly about pipelines and subsea because that's my experience, but also it's where we started with XAMIN and our digitalisation journey. But we already have a topside system in XAMIN. So one of our clients had the subsea side of their business in XAMIN and they really liked it. And so they've extended it successfully to the top sides as well. We're also developing an XAMIN system for a buoy in the Middle East. So that is obviously quite a different piece of infrastructure, but the concepts are the same and the way it's managed is very similar to how other assets are managed. So we can fairly directly relate that to this buoy. So that's really great for us. And also we've seen a lot of interest in digitalization of control systems. So I think a problem we're finding is that control systems aren't particularly regulated. They're not a loss of containment concern. And so there's less driver to kind of manage them in a proactive way. And what we're seeing with our late life operators in particular is that they're spending quite a lot of money on maintaining their system, maybe don't have good control of spares. And there's a lot of ad hoc, maybe DSV campaigns, which obviously are extremely expensive, especially unplanned. So we really want to try and digitalize that, manage spares better, do more predictive assessments on the control systems. And we're starting to see an appetite for that with our clients as well. So I think that's something we're definitely going to push. Outside of kind of like directly in XAMIN, what we'd really like to see is some offshore data capture as well. It can be done, but why not put some of this data straight into a digital platform through a tablet? Some of the things I've shown you all today would work perfectly well just with a tablet, and that could be straight into XAMIN, fantastic, or it could be through a third-party system that they're already used to using, but then directly linking into XAMIN, which populates our inspection reports straight away. That would be great as well. We just talked a little bit about GIS there. So we'd really like to integrate that into XAMIN as well to get that spatial understanding of our assets rather than just a list of anomalies, as useful as that is. You start seeing how anomalies relate to each other. For example, if there was a lot of corrosion occurring at the same place, there was a span of the pipeline, obviously that could impact the fatigue life of the pipeline. So if you can map these things spatially, you can start understanding how they relate to each other better. And also integrate with other Xodus tools. So Xodus has a strong history of digital tools. We've always had a software development group who've built these tools for us, alongside us being an energy consultancy. And so what we're moving towards is one XAMIN platform that has all of these different systems within it. So we've obviously talked about integrity management today, but we have other tools that can do other things like environment, emissions reporting, vibration. And if we could just use one data set that we're getting through a client already, we could then offer them some of these other tools that just use the existing data set that we already have. And then you can start learning more and more about your system. And again, this will be built in a modular way where you can just have the systems that make sense for your assets. So if you've got integrity management, maybe adding in the emission system would make sense because you've got a lot of operating data already. So why not do your emissions reporting through the same system with the same data? Or decommissioning, you've done all this work on gathering integrity data, understanding exactly how your system's working and the condition that it's in. Why not take that straight through to decommissioning and just create your decommissioning options from your integrity management data? And just wanted to leave it on this slide before we go for questions, sorry. We think that digital and data is really important in the industry going forward. It's going to be, we're really starting to see an appetite for people digitalizing different parts of the industry. And it's something that we're really focused on as well. So we're looking at platforms right from the design phase where we can automate our design processes. So we can look at huge amounts of cases in one go, all the way through operation support that we've talked about today, and then kind of right through to kind of reuse and decommissioning. Yeah, okay, so that's everything that I wanted to talk to you about today. So I see there's maybe some questions in the chat, so I'm happy to kind of go through those now, unless anybody wants to ask a question first.
It would be great, Sophie, if you can read them and answer. And maybe after that, if a new question comes, we can listen to our audience.
Okay. Okay, so question coming, do you make use of the plan, do check, act, lesson learned from other projects to improve your model of business with other pipelines? Yeah, absolutely. So the slide that I showed where we had that kind of network of operators. So we built XAMIN with a particular operator for what they needed, but then as we've gained traction with other operators, we've taken learnings from them as well. How do they approach integrity management? What things would they need to know? What things do they need to have in XAMIN? And then we've implemented those for our other clients as well. So we really consider it kind of a collective learnings, and we've had some XAMIN user group sessions as well, where we get all these users together and say, you know, like, what would you like to see? How do you approach it? What would you do differently? So yeah, definitely kind of building that network of operators and building that network of kind of best practice has been a really important part of XAMIN as well. Okay, what's usually the best approach after an integrity planned intervention? A subsea water thickness reduction is above is being captured. Shall a clamp repair intervention plan be ready, or a pipeline repair plan with 2 captors be ready? Unsure. So obviously that's quite a specific question. So I guess obviously if you were finding wall thickness reduction, significant wall thickness reduction, obviously the first thing we would do an integrity assessment to determine whether a repair was needed or not. So particularly with our late life assets, what we're finding is that they're actually maybe operating at a lot significantly reduced pressure to how maybe the design was. So could we reduce the minimum wall thickness initially? That's maybe what we're trying to do first, obviously do that. And then obviously, yeah, I guess depending on where it was in the pipeline, what the defect looked like. If you had a small defect, maybe a clamp would be suitable. If it was a kind of channeling of a whole section of a section of the pipeline or of a spool, you'd maybe look for replacing the whole section of the pipeline. So it would really, what we would try and use a digital tool for there is really kind of mapping out what that corrosion looks like and how extensive it is, which would then hopefully tell us what repair option is most suitable. And yeah, that is something obviously that's quite common, significant corrosion. Hopefully I've answered that in the way it's intended, but yeah, definitely let me know if not. Okay, someone said, as a service provider, can we introduce this program to a pipeline operator, or is there something similar in the market? So we as a service provider to provide this to pipeline operator. We mean in sort of like in a kind of with us as you would sell it to your operators on our behalf. I'm not sure if that's maybe what you mean. And I guess we're open. The answer to that, if that was the question, is that we're open to kind of all commercial models. And if you think you've got a pipeline operator you think this would be beneficial for, like, definitely get in touch and we can definitely have those conversations. We're really just trying to kind of push this kind of best practice as much as we can. So yeah, I think we'd be open to kind of all commercial models. But yeah, definitely as a service provider, we provide this to our clients, and in some cases they take that in-house and then they manage their own integrity themselves. And in some cases we also provide the integrity management service, so we provide the engineers who do a lot of the work. There are other things there on the market, but I think we provide a kind of full integrity management cycle solution. So we're not just doing anomaly management, we're not just doing risk assessment building, which I know there are different systems that do that. We're not just doing analytics, we're doing everything, so the full integrity management solution. So I think that's maybe where we differentiate ourselves. Do you provide training to pipeline owners on how to use the digital tool, or do you manage it yourself? Okay, yeah, so similar to before, yes, we would absolutely provide training to anybody who wanted to use this. We are happy to do it ourselves if somebody wants us to be a service provider, but if they would like to use it as a digital tool within their own company, yeah, we absolutely provide training. And there is some training already in the system, built into the system, but we could obviously provide more as needed. May I have the article on tapping into the existing facility with relation to inspection data? Is that maybe referencing the article that I talked about the data exchange? If so, absolutely, I will send a link after the session and it can be shared with everybody. But yeah, let me know if that's not quite what you meant. Okay, hopefully I've answered everybody's questions. If I've misinterpreted anybody's questions, please just do let me know and I'll look at them again. Or if there's any more, yeah, just let me know.
So anyone have any further question or clarification needed? Actually,
I guess,
yeah,
clear.
so we can listen to Mr. Abdurrahman, Engineer Abdurrahman. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I guess she answered the questions. It's very clear. And as she mentioned, I guess that the type of digitalization of data of the subsea assets, especially when you're dealing with assets that are aging, are one of the biggest challenges we are facing in most of the operating companies in Egypt, especially that we are having some subsea infrastructures that are aging above 20 years, where we have a lot of projects tied in to the same subsea infrastructures. Usually they are different compositions, gas compositions.
Yeah.
Some of them are introduced maybe with sand issues, some with extra water production than we expect during the studies and the engineering phase. SRBs, all these details. That's why it's very difficult to deal with such subsea infrastructure, especially the pipelines.
Yeah, no, absolutely, totally agree. I guess in the North Sea, yeah, 20 plus years is definitely not uncommon for the assets to be operating. So yeah, we have quite a lot of experience and deal with those kind of age of assets. And yeah, similarly, we do have material experts actually who sit within the subsea team. So we try and use their expertise, well, not try, we do use their expertise when we're doing our integrity management assessments. A lot of our integrity management assessments, as you can imagine, are internal corrosion assessments. So we can call about that expertise for those assessments. And actually one of our materials engineers, she's actually sat in with one of our clients as the materials technical authority at the moment, seconded in. So yeah, it's definitely something we're particularly familiar with. So if you'd like to get in touch and talk about it more, please do. We'd be happy to share your experience or help out where we can.
Yes, sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions? I guess no. I have my question myself. Let's wrap up this session with for the tool. Is it different to have the solution for the single pipeline, or do you charge more for adding more pipelines to the same platform? I mean, how do you offer the solution to the clients? Is it all based on the pipelines, or is it based on the fields or whatsoever?
Yeah, so it's a case-by-case basis, really. But yeah, I think generally speaking, the more data that we manage, probably the more we would charge. Having said that, we would say that we're pretty competitive compared to what's there in the market, and we would always kind of find a solution that works for our clients. What we generally do is kind of have a subscription fee, so we have an annual fee for the platform. So there's an initial cost of setting up the system. So if you just had one pipeline and we were just using modules that we basically developed elsewhere for previous clients, that'd be pretty low cost and pretty quick. And then there would be maybe a slightly smaller annual fee. And then we would increase that if it was you managing, like 5 platforms with 100 pipelines. We would obviously, the setup processes would take a little bit longer, obviously. But yeah, no, I'd say that we are competitive, and I think, as I said, because we approach it in this kind of modular fashion, we just offer what you need rather than just giving you a solution that kind of we've built for someone else and that's what you get. That's all you get. And we know from experience, some of the big systems out there that people can probably think of right now, often the operator who pays the most money gets to make the changes to the system, and that may not work for everybody else. We don't take that approach. We make it work for each operator that we're working with.
That's very clear. Thank you for the clarification, Sophie.
That's okay.
Yeah, I would like also to thank you for the informative session tonight. I believe our audience have benefited. I could see this from the questions.
Yeah.
And I would like to thank the participants one by one. We had 8 to 9 participants joining us tonight, and also the recording will be available on our YouTube channel, so latecomers can catch up with what they missed. and also our other followers from the LinkedIn page can also benefit from this informative session of yours. I would like to thank you once again, and also thank your company Xodus for sharing this information with us. Hopefully it can benefit our audience and solve some problems when it comes to integrity management and all these reports and data. So thank you very much for your time. Would like to see you again, hopefully.
Yeah, no, definitely. And yeah, no problem. Appreciate you having us. And yeah, it's been really great to come and work with a sort of a new society as well. So yeah, please get in touch if you've got any further questions or you'd like to know more.
Yes, sure. We'll stay in touch for sure. And by this, we end our session. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Bye.